You set the gold standard for your business. Your website should do the same. Wix puts you at the helm so you can enjoy the creative freedom of designing your site just the way you want. Want someone to bounce your ideas off? Talk with AI to create a beautiful site together. Whatever your business, manage it from one place and tie it all together with a personalized domain name. Gear up for success with a brand that says you best. You can do it yourself on Wix.
With the growing population and the growing popularity of energy-consuming tech like AI, the modern world needs reliable energy sources to meet increasing demand. Wind and solar are powerful, but not always available. The unmatched reliability of natural gas makes it vital for our energy needs. People rely on oil and gas and on Energy Transfer to safely deliver it through an underground system of pipelines across the country. Learn more at energytransfer.com.
And welcome again to the Explaining History podcast. I'm sorry I've been away. This is the first episode I'm doing for a few weeks. I was in Brussels. It was very nice, and I can recommend it certainly as a great travel destination. Very, very pretty. However, when I was away, a lot of my thoughts, as they often do when you're kind of have some downtime, were turning to questions of rent extraction. And I think this is one of the most crucial and overlooked things in the current moment. About how we describe capitalism and how we describe the various iterations of capitalism that exist around the world. There was a kind of a really interesting symposium, going back a long way now, probably during the Occupy movement, with David Graeber, the anarchist anthropologist who sadly died in 2020. And he was talking about the similarities between 21st century capitalism and feudalism. And the argument he put forward goes kind of like this. And it's slightly different from Yanis Varoufakis's ideas around tech feudalism. I think a version of a kind of rentier, economic rentier, also financial rentier feudalism has existed long before the rise of the tech giants. But anyway, the idea goes like this, is that convention, and we're looking at the rationale and the way in which, I guess, Marx described capitalism in the 19th century, and also the way in which kind of capitalism has sort of self-identified, this sort of productive manufacturing capitalism where you, as a capitalist, hire workers and coerce them sufficiently that they don't do terribly unfortunate things like form trade unions and demand higher wages, but you hire workers, capture resources, put them together in a factory, and charge more for the finished product than you give away in wages. And that's where profit comes from. That's where the capital comes from. And therefore, when you look at, this does indeed still happen. There is manufacturing throughout the kind of the capitalist world, But if you were to take the US economy or the British economy or any major first world notionally capitalist economy, and that title is up for dispute based on this description. If you were to take the pie chart of that economy, you would find that a significantly larger percentage of this, and this was, the neoliberal revolution was designed to create this outcome. A significantly larger sort of share of the pie would go to finance. And finance is really the business of rent extraction. When you take out a bank loan or a credit card, you are renting money from a bank. They will lend you $1,000 or £1,000 at a certain rate of interest, and that is the rate of interest is the rent that they charge on the money. Okay, so far so obvious. When you look at physical objects, cars, computers, fridge freezers, whatever it is, the companies that manufacture and then also market those products, a significant, perhaps even in the case of cars, a majority of the income of that company comes not from selling cars but from renting money, from offering finance on a $20,000 or £20,000 car that a person can't afford outright unless they are extremely wealthy, and then taking payment for that in marginal chunks throughout the year, and thus finally making more than the $20,000 or £20,000 on the vehicle's price tag. What does this mean? What does this mean? It means that in the Western world, at the very least, the majority of wealth comes from rent extraction. How do societies keep functioning? Where in the feudal era, rent came from land. Peasants would work the land, sell their produce at market, and they would be the kind of the agricultural proletariat. They would sometimes earn wages through selling their labour, but often they would also earn wages through selling their produce in order to pay rents on the land. So they were kind of, I don't want to say entrepreneurial because that's to misunderstand the term, but they were certainly productive, part of a productive class. Of course, not many of us are entrepreneurial. Not many of us are running sort of kitchen table side hustles to pay for the financial rents that are being extracted from us. So we are part of this kind of salaried class. It explains why it is that as a sort of the salaried class in Western countries gets poorer over time, because having generally more extracted from it, and the owners of financial capital have an interest in driving down things like kind of income redistribution, social welfare, and that kind of thing. Because if somebody is in receipt of state benefits, they don't need to rent money off you. If they are in receipt of state housing, they don't need to rent housing from a private landlord class. If they are in receipt of free healthcare, they don't have to take out insurance products. The whole system thrives on precarity, and precarity is what neoliberalism sought to create. It had to create that in order for it to kind of for it to thrive. So a great deal, one of the things that David Graeber often wrote about was the development of bureaucracy, both state and private. And with financialization becomes this kind of plethora of in his famous book Bullshit Jobs, of kind of bureaucratized roles, which when you reach a certain point, a great many of them seem to lack any reason or rationale for existing in the first place. And a great many people in European and North American countries now exist in this way. They are kind of hemmed in between financialization and bureaucratization, and of course this is how we've consciously restructured the system under which we live. Of course, manufacturing now, almost everything I look at in the room that I'm recording this from the flooring beneath my feet to the furniture to probably the laptop I'm talking to you to, was manufactured in southern China, maybe a bit in Vietnam, but mainly in southern China. And I think something approaching 40 to 45% of all the world's manufacturing is now concentrated in China. And it's the result of this kind of extraordinary, short-sighted gambit that was made in the 1980s. And I think it was part of this kind of capitalist utopian idea that gradually over time, as countries move from being primary producers of resources such as agriculture and mining and timber, they then had industrial revolutions and produced manufactured goods. And at a certain point, they decided that producing widgets on a production line wasn't really necessary any longer. And so we became what you euphemistically call service-based countries. The services in question obviously being financial services for the most part. And this was what it was imagined would be the way in which Western economies would function. Of course, in order to do that, what you have to do is mothball significant parts of your own state. You have to mothball significant parts of your own civil society, and you have to mothball significant industries. A classic example here in Great Britain was the conscious destruction of the mining industry. The mining industry was also consciously destroyed because it was going to be the way in which organised labour, the great kind of shibboleth of the Tory party, was brought to heel, and also organised labour. In all the writings of the neoliberals like Hayek and Friedman and von Mises, this was going to organised labour and its ability to strike and demand higher wages was the great disruptor of the neoliberal revolution. It was the thing that had to be swept out of the way. That and third world independence movements, where third world national liberation movements demanded fair payment for their resources. This, in the eyes of the neoliberals, who were a kind of simply recreating a kind of a new iteration of imperialism, this to them was simply unacceptable, and would mess with the kind of the system of global economy that they kind of theorized and envisioned.
The key to good skin is hidden deep in the ocean. Osea's Undaria algae body oil harnesses the powers of Undaria seaweed for silky, soft, and glowing skin. Clinically shown to instantly improve skin elasticity, Osea's Undaria algae body oil isn't your typical body oil. Get 10% off your first order with code SEAWEED10 at OSEAMalibu.com. Plus, free samples with every order and free shipping on orders over $50.
You set the gold standard for your business. Your website should do the same. Wix puts you at the helm, so you can enjoy the creative freedom of designing your site just the way you want. Want someone to bounce your ideas off? Talk with AI to create a beautiful site together. Whatever your business, manage it from one place and tie it all together with a personalized domain name. Gear up for success with a brand that says you best. You can do it yourself on Wix.
Coming back to the question of financialization, though, and the kind of the rationale behind it and the reason behind it, there seems to have been in 1979, one of the kind of the great transitions was towards neoliberalism in America, was the decision, I think it was by Paul Volcker, to essentially turn America into the world's bank. And by doing so, ratcheting up interest rates, this makes American industry have something of a kind of almost 1929 type heart attack, because if you're a sawmill or a steel mill in Ohio or Pennsylvania, what you rely on is short-term credit. You might sell $5 million worth of steel in month 1, but you get paid for it in month 3, but you have to pay your workers in month 2, so you borrow short-term. And there's a kind of a fairly standardized system of financing in order to do this. The moment that borrowing starts to cost 2 or 3 times as much, your margins are wiped out and you go bust. That and long-term debt that American industry had accumulated was devastating. So why whack up the interest rates? Well, the reason for doing it is because it offers attractive rewards for overseas capital to deposit money in American banks, and you then make Wall Street the locus of the American financial system. That's kind of you create all these hot flows of cash into Wall Street. And in both Britain and America, and this kind of, in a way, seals the fate of both countries in the 21st century. But both Britain and America in the late 20th century chose to sacrifice their manufacturing industries. They chose to leave their workers on the scrap heap. They chose to deindustrialize. They chose to outsource manufacturing, and they chose to use what was then cheap overseas workers in China and other Southeast Asian countries to produce manufacturing goods which could then be resold into America and Great Britain and other first world countries, which under conditions of neoliberalism were starting to become low-wage economies, because the New Deal in America and the welfare state in Britain were being slowly shredded and eviscerated in order to create poorer, more insecure workers and to reward capital exponentially. Now, the problem with that is, even if you're an elite, even if you are part of the ruling class in America or the ruling class in Britain, is you only get to do it once. And the reason you only get to do it once is because you shred your infrastructure, you shred your society, you create high levels of poverty, low levels of literacy, high levels of things like drug dependency, violent crime, all of that. And the kinds of elite workers that you expect to run your economies of the future, your industries of the future, aren't produced on the scale that you need. But they are produced in China and in other rising Southeast Asian countries, and the assumption is that this is, and this is what capitalism always does. It's just this great system for kicking the can down the road. The American capitalist classes think, well, that's a tomorrow problem. It's not a today problem. We think in short-termist business cycles and shareholder dividend payments. We are not thinking in 5, 10, 20, 50-year terms. Well, China did think in those terms. And it must have seemed to Chinese premiers from Deng Xiaoping onwards like an extraordinary unforced error that America and Western Europe were doing. When you fast forward to 2019, and in 2019, Trump tried tariffs on China for the first time, and the Chinese didn't blink, fortunately for them, and instead, from 2019 onwards, all the way through to 2025, prepared for Trump 2.0, which they presciently assumed was more than likely to happen. Diversifying their markets, building domestic demand, pouring money into renewables, artificial intelligence, robotics, high-speed rail, and every other cutting-edge technology of the 21st century. The other side of the world economy is what you would call a state-led. I mean, so many people try to define what the Chinese economy is, and inevitably I will be wide of the mark. I'm going to give it a go, but don't at me is all I can say. I would call it a state-led capitalism with socialist characteristics. In that, if you were thinking of a kind of the most rawest, visceral form of capitalism, it is a society where capital is completely and utterly in charge, and that's a society you would describe as an oligarchy, where rich people with lots of capital are the ones making the political decisions. Okay? Most of the time we don't exist in exactly that, but we are slowly, I think the neoliberal era removed the majority of the checks and balances to prevent that from happening. So we're kind of getting there. And it's kind of like a tech version of England during the Wars of the Roses, where you have overmighty barons that kind of call the shots over the crown, and bad things generally tend to ensue for long periods of time.
The key to good skin is hidden deep in the ocean. Osea's Undaria algae body oil harnesses the powers of Undaria seaweed for silky, soft, and glowing skin. Clinically shown to instantly improve skin elasticity, Osea's Undaria algae body oil isn't your typical body oil. Get 10% off your first order with code SEAWEED10 at OSEAMalibu.com. Plus, free samples with every order and free shipping on orders over $50.
You set the gold standard for your business. Your website should do the same. Wix puts you at the helm so you can enjoy the creative freedom of designing your site just the way you want. Want someone to bounce your ideas off? Talk with AI to create a beautiful site together. Whatever your business, manage it from one place and tie it all together with a personalized domain name. Gear up for success with a brand that says you best. You can do it yourself on Wix.
In China, one of the key determinants of Chinese success is the fact that the Chinese government managed to control capital. The Chinese state has controlling interest in its banks. The Chinese state is authoritarian enough that if it didn't have controlling interest in its banks, it could act decisively and probably quite violently in authoritarian ways against the controllers of capital. They know when to not step out of line. This means that the capital itself can be directed towards national missions, creating high-speed rail, for example. One of the reasons why China can create thousands and thousands of miles of high-speed rail while Britain and America struggle to create any at all is because the land on which the rail is built belongs to the state. It doesn't have to ask nicely to anybody when it wants to build a railway. Now, this is probably not desirable in most instances, and certainly you can imagine in your local area what that might mean in terms of houses being demolished. But nonetheless, railways are built. And capital itself is reined in. Capital, there are billionaires in China and plenty of them, and the ownership of private capital is perfectly achievable and perfectly doable and perfectly acceptable in China, but capital itself is given a swift rebuke when it challenges the power of the state. The state itself claims to be acting in the will of the people, and therefore it is an expression of the people's will, and all those kind of sort of notional versions of democracy. But it means that we have two economic systems in the world. A quasi-feudal financial rentier system in the Western world, and we have an increasingly advanced industrial, high investment, high R&D, highly educated state capital with socialist characteristics system in China. Now, a tipping point, again, a second tipping point, I think, will come this year, perhaps, or maybe next year, where the very idea of challenging China from an American point of view falls by the wayside. At that point, the game is decided for the 21st century, and I think that point will come because the levels of things like missile technology, for example, mean that the US Pacific fleet has pulled back to Guam and Hawaii. It's not in Okinawa or patrolling those waters any longer, and that means really that Taiwan's fate is pretty much sealed. The inability of America to present itself as a moral leader in the world, or an economic leader in terms of living standards, or even as a military superpower that can tell any other country what to do, in many ways indeed, is the product of the period of the last 50 years, where financialization and rent extraction was allowed to replace the real world economy. And this has been the hollowing out process that America and other Western world countries have endured. So I guess, for 500 years, the Western world had a good run, but it seems it's kind of over. And when people will look at the Thatcher-Reagan period in 100 years' time, it might be that they see it in something approaching that context. Who knows? It's a matter for historians in the future. Anyway, it's good to be back, and I will be bringing you exciting interviews soon and other stuff throughout the week. Check out the Substack, and I will catch you on the next podcast. Bye-bye.
running a business is hard work. Building your website shouldn't be. With Wix, you can express your ideas, give direction, then leave the heavy lifting to AI. From site creation to branded content and images. Have fun with the details. Customize what you want the way you want. And manage your whole business from a centralized dashboard with expert AI tools. Build, scale, and enjoy the incredible results. You can do it all yourself on Wix.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
With so much uncertainty in the economy, we need to rely on experts we can trust. So Money, hosted by me, Farnoosh Torabi, is a Webby Award-winning podcast now in its 10th year. The New York Times calls it one of the most respected personal finance shows out there. As a financial journalist for more than 20 years and best-selling author, let me tell you, it is a privilege to produce this show. And whether you want to save more, invest, or negotiate a better salary, I've got you covered with fresh episodes 3 times a week. And here's something extra. I'm giving away a free money call to one lucky listener every week, a chance for you and I to talk one-on-one and create a personal plan for your goals. Listen and subscribe to So Money wherever you get your podcasts.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.